Good day to you all out there in Zoom land. Thank you for joining the Wildland lecture for Fire 110. This is from College of Marin. I'm Ken Allen, and I'm going to talk you through some of the very, very basic broad strokes of wildland firefighting. So without any further ado, let's begin. And we're starting at the end. Just kidding. Here we are, gang. Welcome to this lecture. This is about pieced together from a few other lectures that I've given and seen. And so I give credit to those firefighters and instructors who put this together. Some of the things and clips are from them. So thank you very much for not copywriting them so I could use them. We're going to go through it. Now, I understand that many of you have had experience working in wildland firefighting, at least doing cleanup and using the tools and lighting off to do fire control. So for some of you, this will be a review. Some of you, it'll be new. I can guarantee you will learn more on this, even if you have worked in the field. Our goal by lecture's end is for you to be able to describe the basic terminology. And I think that's important. You have to understand what the radio is telling you to do on these fires and telling you where to stay away from. So we have to understand the actual terminology that we're going to use. Elements of the fire triangle describe the methods of heat transfer. So let's take a look quickly at wildland vehicles that you will commonly see. This is a Type 6 engine, and this is what we call a brush patrol. Often that's brush patrol 27. This has a small reservoir of water and about 20 feet of 1.5-inch hose above in this crosslay. The engineer and either a medic, firefighter, or a fire EMT are stationed on this. The engineer is built to travel up a flank while the passenger pulls the hose and does a rapid fire attack. And these are meant for rapid offensive fire attacks, usually bunched together with another brush patrol or a Type 6, as well as potentially a hand crew or anybody else that might serve as a quick offensive attack. Here's a Type 3 engine. This is your basic wildland 4 to 6 person vehicle. In this case, this has four-wheel drive, as does the brush patrol. It also has the capability to pump and roll, meaning that it can drive and use the pump. They're not built on the same drivetrain like a Type 1 engine is. And the reason the Type 1 engine is built in such a way is to disengage the drive and engage the pump so that the engine doesn't have a mishap and begin driving away from the fire scene. In this case, we want the opportunity to, as with the brush patrol, have an engineer driving while one or many firefighters use the hose lines off of the Type 3 to pump and drive down the fire flank, putting out fire as you go. A little bit bigger, a little less able to maneuver like a brush patrol can. You have more people, more supplies, and you will often see these Type 3s and Type 6s put together, much like you would a bomber and a fighter company in World War II, a fighter squadron. Then you have your troops, and this is a carrier. Essentially, this is going to bring all of the firefighter crews, the hand crews, the prison crews. You've probably been in one of these already, to different strike teams to take them back and forth to the lines to do work. Maybe the crew members inside there would be assigned to the other Type 6 and Type 3 engines. And then you would have a single resource, a chief or captain that drives around in an SUV. Typically, it's four-wheel drive, and they will go and do weather measurements in the beginning of the shift. They will go and do fire lookout and operate as a single person, which we call a single resource. Then you have your aerial craft. You have your fixed wing, or what we would call an airplane. And you've seen they have even larger ones nowadays that are the 747s that carry a huge amount of water. They have these smaller propeller type engines that will deliver a little less water volume with the expense of having also a better maneuverability into tight locations. And even more so is the operations of the helicopter. Most of the time, you see helicopters showing up on pretty much everything. They can do all sorts of fun utilitarian things. They can grab their own water. They usually use a long string and a bucket on the end and will go to the nearest lake, creek, or pool and suck up the water, or just slunk up the water with the bucket, carry it over to the fire, dump it, as you can see right here, right on the crew, which is a beautiful thing to see. Oftentimes they come in and save crews that get stuck or they're getting overrun by fire, and it's a beautiful thing. By the way, if you ever hear these planes coming overhead, if you can hear the that means they're going to be dumping. And if that's right over your head, get on the ground. Has an incredible amount of weight to it. In all of these cases, you've seen water being ejected from the craft. You will also see a pinkish red fire retardant also being used. The difference is the fire retardant is a gelatinous type of chemical that not only cools the fire, but blankets the fuel and doesn't allow heat to promulgate, basically snuffing out both fuel and heat and oxygen. And remember that this fire triangle is what we're looking at in the older days, and this is now the fire tetrahedron, meaning we need oxygen, we need heat, we need fuel. But every fire requires a match. Every fire requires some kind of initial chemical catalyst or thermal catalyst or a chain reactor that once this pyramid begins to, it sets this pyramid into its purpose of burning forwards. So the chain reaction is the fourth portion of the fire tetrahedron, not listed here. Let's go through a basic fire and talk about some of the fire location names. This would be as an aerial surveillance of a fire. And we can see a few things already. Charred out. You can see fire on that edge.
Sage IC, Sage air attack. Sir, coming on station over your fire. Like a rundown on what I'm seeing.
That would be great, Sage Air Attack. Go ahead.
Okay, going around the clock from the heel, where I see you've established an anchor point where the black meets the 2-track road, correct?
Affirmative. We got a solid anchor point here, and good black as a safety zone.
I agree. Looks like you will be able to get all your folks into that safety zone without any trouble. On the left flank, you've got a running fire with 3 to 5 foot flame lengths burning in grass and sage. In about what looks like half a mile, your fire is going to get in some juniper as it moves from the flats onto the slope of the sage hill.
Copy that. We're progressing with a mobile attack on the left flank, but I doubt we'll be able to cut it off before it gets into the timber with this rate of spread of about 6 chains an hour. We've got winds out of the east at about 12 miles per hour. We're seeing some fire whirls down here too.
Okay, well, let me know how I can help you with that.
Uh-oh.
You do have a couple spot fires, 2 to 3 chains in front of the head of this thing. I can put some aircraft on that if you'd like.
Sounds good, but give me a rundown on the right flank before you do that.
Copy. Right flank is backing into the wind and will likely hang up on the 2-track to the east. Left flank is definitely a priority.
Couple good terms there that we're going to review on now. The perimeter of the fire, the entirety of the burn and or the black and the flames. This is your fire perimeter. This is what we're gauging to figure out how many crew members are going to be needed and what types of resources to fight this fire. The point of origin, which typically is at the crux of the V of the fire. Oftentimes, this is natural or like a man-made road where someone tossed a cigarette, or a camping site where this is a fire pit that was not controlled and put out before the people left. And as it burns in two directions. And then we have to look at a couple of things. Many factors go into the directions that the fire's running. The head of the fire is the main movement of that fire, how quickly it's spreading, typically largely determined by weather, wind direction, and topography, what type of fuel, as well as what kind of terrain is there. Is this going up the hill with wind? Is this down the hill with the wind blowing the other direction? If that's the case, probably a head will be over on the opposite direction. It's the most rapidly spreading portion of the perimeter. There are flanks, which are the two sides of the fire. Again, always spreading wider. You have the heel of the fire, the back edge. That's while the head's going this way, this side is still growing, albeit it's growing against wind direction or topography in a way that is making the spread slower. Here's a little burned out area called the finger. So if you were to look at this and think of Michigan, think of the finger as the burned black little peninsula of land, or fire in this case as well. Then you have a pocket, which is the unburned portion between the perimeter or the flanks and the finger. This is an unburned location, a pocket of unburned fuel. We have an island here. You can see in this island, it's a spot of unburned fuel or unburned area. This is probably because in this location, it looks like it's largely rock and maybe some scrub pine. And so the fire really didn't have enough fuel to grab hold and burn through that location. These islands can be really good, safe locations. They can also be dangerous if there's a lot of fuel packed in that spot. You have on this side, the spot, a couple of little wind-driven fires that usually come from embers that have been lifted by high winds and dropped further away from the flanks of the fire. As you heard, the aerial cruiser is particularly good at finding and putting those out to allow hand and vehicle crews to work on the majority of the fire. Then the other aerial crews can come through and help out by putting out, perimeters and so forth. But our main goal is to stop all of this, as well as any additional fire origins. Okay, let's talk suppression terminology. Where's our anchor point, our control line, our fire line, our mop up? When is the fire contained versus controlled? And how much is it chained? Our anchor point is usually set up at a point where you have set an area that has no more burning fuel and has a natural block for that fire. Oftentimes, it's the road that you drive into where you find the base of the fire, and then you start working off of that area. And now you're looking at two safe flanks for your crews to deploy up and onto the fire with, as well as plenty of safety zones around that location. This is a great location because, again, it keeps the barrier of the fire from any kind of spread, and it keeps your crews safe. There we go. You're building control lines with your, this is probably you all here, putting in any kind of manual labor to build out or cut out any fuel to get down to mineral soil. As you know, you go through this with the complement of tools, first starting with something like a McLeod or a scraping shovel. Scrape a little bit. The next person who comes through scrapes more, and you scrape deeper and wider as you go. The Pulaski follows and chops up any large fuel pieces like uh, sticks, logs, so forth. And this is backbreaking labor. So if your head's up and you're thinking about building a control line, well, we all need them. So why not just use natural control lines? Here's a beautiful culvert or drainage ditch that is built of, in this case, it looks like it's some kind of corrugated, either cement or rubber, and then a giant ditch of water. That's going to be a pretty good control line if the fire is coming this direction. It might be a little bit too narrow considering the fuel load on this side, but this is a good place to start if the fire's just getting started and we want to consider a quick control line. Whoops, excuse me. And then lastly, a great one again, depending on where you are, railroad tracks, big roads, freeways, railroad tracks, airports, natural boundaries, or man-made boundaries that will definitely slow and ideally cease the movement of fire from one fire line to the next. Nice of you. Thanks, buddy. What do we got? We got a nice little magnet. That's great. Thanks, bud. All right. You have fire control lines as part of a containment or control line that is scraped or dug into mineral soil, same kind of idea as a fire line. And now let's get into mop up. This is when we start extinguishing or removing burning material near the control line, taking care of fellings of snags, pieces of branches and so forth that are hanging on the tree limbs, taking down trees, trenching logs, preventing rolling after the area is burned, making sure that the fire's not skunking around or kind of underneath a set of duff or something of that sort. So we're trying to now kind of go through just like we would in salvage and overhaul and find the hidden fire fingers to ideally put it out and not have a rekindle. This is the equivalent of salvage and overhaul in structure protection, and we call it mop up. This is an Indian pump is one of the terms you'll hear for this. They also call it a piss pump. I'm sure a few of you are intimately familiar with the weight and the discomfort of these narrow nylon webbing straps. It's much nicer when you're about halfway full. And you know, the best way to do this is just put your thumb on the end of that thing and make it splay out rather than a deep single stream. When is the fire contained? Well, that's when a control line has been completed around the fire, any associated spot fires and any associated spot fires, and expected to stop the fire's spread. So we've gotten around a burning fire. It looks like we are in good shape and that we're not going to have this fire jump those lines. We're now containing a burning fire. A controlled fire is when you have that contained line around it, and any spot fires near islands are saved, and you've now burned out any areas that are at a potential risk of rekindle, or you've essentially burned out the remaining fuel of the fire to a point of acceptability. And you've put out all the hot spots and all of the snags and so forth are in good shape. You're not concerned with anything coming down. Lines are reasonably expected to hold under foreseeable fire and weather conditions. How far is a chain? Like a chain 66, baby. 66 feet or 20 meters is a unit of measure in wildland. Why? Well, 66 feet equals 20 meters. 80 chains equals 1 mile, and 10 square chains equals 1 acre. So we use this to report on fire perimeters and fire lines, and sometimes we'll talk in terms of where we want crews to deploy. Here's some wildland fire behavior that you should be well aware of and know what it is when they call it out. Smoldering. Well, I think we all kind of know that one. This is just smoking, steaming. It's actually not steam, it's pyrolysis and smoke and maybe a little licking fire, but without the significant presence of flame or direct flame or heat. Here's a creeping fire where there is a little bit higher flame, low length flame, but certainly more than smoldering. And it's kind of creeping along into the lower vegetation. Here's a fire that's running. This is when the fire gets a good head on it and it reaches an area like an uphill or a valley between two hills, and it's going upwind and uphill. That's a simple chimney that's going to drive that fire right up the side of a hillside due to topography and weather, and potentially also due to fuel. What kind of fuel are we there dealing with? How big is that fuel is another big concern. Our fuel load gets larger as the vegetation becomes denser and thicker. And so what we often see is what's called laddering, where it moves from chaparral or brush to larger brush. And then if that remains unchecked, it gets into deeper forests, trees, deciduous, duff in the ground. And once it's in there, you're dealing with extreme temperatures and the fire begins to create its own behavior. You have spotting when the wind carries sparks or embers to a different location outside of the main fire perimeter. Here's a tree that is torching. It's going from ground up, and you're getting a single tree that's completely on fire. These, again, are really dangerous because they can throw embers high and with a lot of velocity that will then spot elsewhere. And in some cases, you're getting spotting on large fires a mile or two away because it just floats in the fire until it moves into the higher wind direction and current, and it's taken to a location distant from where the main resources are. You have a flare up, a sudden acceleration in the rate of speed or intensification of the fire, relatively short duration, and does not change the existing control plans, but it's caught something and it suddenly speeds up. Maybe it's a patch of fuel that is remained dry and easily burned, and the fire suddenly reaches it and just flares up. It rapidly runs through that. In some cases, that can change the direction of the fire, and it can change what our plans are on this. Another method of things moving quickly through the topography is when the fire begins to create its own patterns of weather, and it begins to spin the fire like a tornado, which we call a fire whirl, or in some places you'll hear fire nado. It's probably nado. Anyway, spinning the vortex that can ascend air hot into the air, into the weather, into the clouds. And in some cases, as I've said, a friend of mine witnessed a fire whirl bend down and light a neighboring hillside on fire that was about 25 yards away. They can do tremendous things. You'll see amazing fire behavior when you're dealing with wildland. In a backing fire, the fire is moving downhill, which is not the direction fire typically wants to go. It likes to go uphill with wind. This is downhill against wind in some cases. Maybe downhill, but with wind. It's just not as fast, and it's, as you say, backing down the road. The flame front is the main portion of the fire that's burning, usually due to the type of terrain, the fuel, and the wind that's driving it. and it's the main flank of the active fire. Crowning is when the fire suddenly runs not across the ground, but into a copse of trees and burns across all of the upper branches and leaves. It crowns over your head, and if you're underneath that, drop everything and run. That can happen incredibly fast. Think of the wind direction, just even 20 feet above the ground is entirely unmitigated by any of the regular trees and ground below it. And so this this blows much more uniform and in one direction. And if the fire is able to get up into that upper wind, to say nothing of the fire creating its own weather patterns, it can then quickly run across or crown across all of the trees above you. And if you're underneath there, you gotta go quick. There you can see it's pretty intense. What's this one? Yep. It's one tree. All these other trees are freaking out. How do we put them out? Heat. We can use water. We can use smothering to prevent oxygen from getting to the fuel. So even if you don't have water, you could still use shovels and so forth. And then fuel, you can just dump stuff on top of that and pull out all of the fuel. I shouldn't say dump, I should say scoop everything away from the fire to remove the fuel and allow the fire to strangulate, essentially suffocate. Here's some movement of oxygen. Usually in the air we breathe, about 21% oxygen. We only need 16% for combustion to occur. So we're already running at a higher percentage. This kind of changes depending on the sea level. The lower we are, the more oxygen. The higher up you are, the less oxygen. But that doesn't really change it when the fire is roaring through there. Here's some heat. Here are natural ways that fires can get started. Obviously, lightning is the traditional way. And then as mankind learned to harness, I say in quotes, fire, we've also been the cause of the culprit. And then fuel is just what's growing out there. You can think of it in terms of your smaller grass that will ladder to shrubs, to timber, to slash or fallen timber, artificial materials, things like, grow farms, greenhouses, houses that are left unchecked and abandoned in the woods. Those are going to burn, especially if they're older, very quickly. Wood is dried, seasoned. There are no protections to stopping that house from burning. There's some weed and grass, usually a little bit slower fire. Usually you can walk right up and into this and put it out with very little risk of burn or death. Brush a little bit thicker, a little harder to walk through, and I would advise against it. And then lastly, down here, look at forests. Once they starts burning into thick, dense trees, not a good idea to go in to those. So we have to build our containment perimeter beyond that point and hope for the best. And usually you want to build it at least 1.5 times the distance to the furthest amount of trees or fuel. So we're digging fire lines. What are we doing here? Well, we want to remove all the vegetation and debris, clean down to mineral soil, which just means, darker brown or blackened soil. Widen to provide sufficient fire break. Throw all burned charred material into the black. That's an easy way of getting rid of that fire's potential fuel, is just throwing it over 10 or 15 feet into the already burned portion of the fire. That's out as well. Scatter all cut and unburned fuels into the green. And remove all branches that hang over the fire line. You should probably build beyond the fire line if at all possible. Here's a direct fire attack. This is with a type 3, but this is also what type 6s do. You're walking 1 foot in the green and 1 foot in the burned or the black. One in the green, one in the black. And this can be rapid, this can be thorough, but you need, remember, we only have a limited amount of water and we have a lot of ground to cover. So the goal is how well can you put the fire out with one single pass of the hose line and still prevent it from moving too much forward. So how quickly can you put out the fire in front of you and move on to catch the flank beyond you? Ideally, you have like a series. There's would be a brush patrol that would then drive up in front of you and begin fighting the fire here. You would end your water supply about there and leave, refill at a tanker or a tender, and come back and jump in front of the fire brush patrol and continue. And you're working in series that way. Another way might be to work in tandem or down both flanks in a pinch and maneuver. Here's an indirect attack where they're taking away green fuel with the idea that they're going to sacrifice this if need be in order to stop it from moving beyond that point. Here's a good flank attack. This would be you're working in a parallel to get around the fire, build the fire break, and then kind of come through and put this out. This is what type 3s and 6s are all about right there. Rapid attack on the perimeters. Always keep in mind your lookouts, know where your fire is and where it's going. Have someone looking out to see fire direction and behavior. Be on the right channels. Know that your company is on the right channel. And you're operating, you're listening to maybe a couple different command, tactical, and potentially aerial channels. Let everyone be fully aware of what's happening in all different locations. And that ideally will prevent any mishaps from occurring. Know at all times, if this goes to hell, where are our escape routes? How are we getting out of here? Have 2 or 3, have at least 2. Know how you're getting out of there and your safety zones. And where are we running to? Yes, we have 2 paths out of here, but where do they lead and how far away is that? And is it at a reasonable distance compared to the fire behavior? And we know if this fire were to turn and come back at us, we would be able to use that safety zone and escape route and make it there without having to deploy into your thermal blankets. You don't want to have to shake and bake. That's not a safety zone. That is not a zone of safety. That is an emergency zone that you're hoping doesn't burn. That's not the same thing. A safety zone, a football field, a parking lot, a school with a lot of asphalt around it, any kind of shopping center where the fire is too small to envelop that area, across large amounts of freeway, or something where you're running into a large rocky portion of the ground. Those are good safety zones. And then as that fire passes beyond, you can go and continue fighting the fire. You can always be aided by aerial companies coming and dousing the ground with some cold water or retardant, and that's just an added layer of protection. Lastly, here I got the video of the Yarnell fire, and this is a story of firefighters that, for some unknown reason, at the end of their shift, decided to go back down into the fire and try and put it out. The fire changed directions and attacked them while they were in the middle of a valley, and it ran right up and it caught all of the crew members and they all died. They made a movie about it. This is the real story. One of the big thoughts is that this was a local fire company and they were fighting a campaign fire in their area. They knew the people in the homes. They wanted to be heroic and take care of things themselves. Maybe there was a certain amount of pride that went along with it, maybe a certain amount of stubborn heroicism that said, we will go into a dangerous location to fight this fire because that's what we signed up to do, and got in over their heads.
There's a problem that the nation needs to look at trying to solve. Fires are getting bigger and more extreme. Since the South Canyon fire in '94, there have been 400 wildland firefighters killed and 40,000 homes lost.
He sent me a text message going to a 500-acre fire in Yarnell. And that was the last time I heard from him.
Right on, please.
I could just see all these wives just crying. I found out that people that I loved died.
Wildland fire scene has changed dramatically. In the urban setting, there's really no place for open fire. Urban sprawl is colliding with wildlands. That matters because these two don't mix. Fires in one don't belong in the other.
We're losing property, we're losing lives because people are choosing to live there. This terrain will easily, produce a 40-foot flame lake.
People are in danger now because the climate has shifted on us. In the desert Southwest, it's getting drier and drier every year.
The fires are burning hotter and they're burning faster.
Some of the climate change models play out as predicted. We're going to see the fires move to where the houses are. At that point, it's a real game changer. There is really no way to protect those structures. Under extreme conditions, this is the equivalent of a tornado coming through. Why are you sending people in to protect houses? There's nothing they're going to be able to do until those conditions change.
The Yarnell Hill fire started by a lightning strike high up on a mountain desert ridge. The fire smoldered throughout that night. There were several small fires started.
In the desert Southwest, the atmosphere is so dry that these big raining thunderstorms all evaporate before it even hits the ground. But the lightning sparks all this dry tinder and you've got wildfire in an instant.
One of the crews that was dispatched early on the morning of June 30th was the Granite Mountain Hotshots. Hotshots are a very highly trained group of about 20 people, and their job is to go into wildfire situations and bring wildfires under control.
It was a Sunday, so we were hoping that Robert would have to go to work. I could tell that he was not happy to have to get up so early that morning. I kind of watched him get his boots on and he kissed me goodbye. When they have early mornings like that, sometimes I can manage to actually get up with him and visit for a few minutes while he drinks some coffee or whatever. But that morning I didn't. So I think he probably left about 5 o'clock. I could hear him walk down to my kids' rooms and gave them a kiss, told them he loved them, and gave me a kiss goodbye, told me he loved me. And he walked out the door. That was the last that I saw him.
We got a briefing that we're to Yarnell for a lightning fire. It was really not that active. It was kind of just skunking around.
If anything, I thought, oh, he's going to be home early tonight. It's a local fire. It's a little fire. It's not a big deal,
We started hiking in and it was hot. It's 10 o'clock and I was sweating hard. Different than normal. We dug line, did some saw work in there.
Hotshots don't typically carry water hoses. They're not going out there and putting the fire out in the sense that a fire department would put the fire out at a house.
They carry different types of hand tools to clear shrubs or trees or brush and create open spaces that can help stop the progress of a fire.
Came around, met back up there. That's when he asked me to be on the lookout. We had seen a point down low where I could really get some good eyes on it and had a good way out, good safety zone for if anything were to turn south that day. I could see the fire and see what it was doing, and it was just really progressing away from us.
The fire was over at this hill over here.
Sonny and Joy are local residents in the Yarnell area who happened to be hiking that afternoon before Granite Mountain hotshots even arrived.
So we just did our climb up the hilltop of Yarnell, and we found a different the fire, and we saw a big fire crew.
We weren't too concerned about it early on because the fire wasn't that bad.
About 3 hours into my lookout position is when the weather came over the radio. He tells me the wind shift we're gonna get. Let's move quick.
43-mile-per-hour wind gusts coming from the complete opposite direction. Now the flames are coming right for them.
I could feel the breeze coming that way, and that was scary because if you watched the fire going up that mountain, it was doing 30 and 40-foot waves of fire.
You know,
For me, that was kind of alarming. When that wind shifted, the concern had turned to me because of my proximity to the fire. I remember looking back before I left and seeing what the fire was doing. I see this intense fire starting to pick up. Went from like a white, calm smoke to like black smoke. Black usually means it's burning pretty intense.
It was a full-fledged wildfire. It was no longer human containable as far as I was concerned.
I'm moving pretty quick. I get a hold of Steve and Eric and I let them know, hey, at the vehicles, see you soon.
At about 3:30 in the afternoon, the Granite Mountain hotshots are located in a safety zone high up on a ridge overlooking the town of Yarnell. And it was a safety zone because it's an area where the fire had already burned through. That's called being in the black. One of the operation supervisors radios the Granite Mountain hotshot crew leaders and asks the crew whether they could deploy resources down to Yarnell. The Granite Mountain hotshot crew leader responds and says, no, we're staying here. We got good black. We're not moving anywhere. The videotape captures a conversation about the comfort level about some sort of action that's getting ready to take place. Moments later, the hotshot crew decides to leave the safety zone and move down into what is clearly a very dangerous situation. Why would they change their mind? Well, that's the big question that I think a lot of people are going to be debating for years to come.
Once they enter into that drop, they can no longer see directly what the fire's doing. And at that time, there's nobody looking out for them that could have told them that that fire's about to turn the corner. So what they see is a huge flame front starting up towards them. It's moving like 12 miles an hour, and that's too fast to outrun.
Once it goes, I mean, there's no stopping it. It's almost impossible to stop unless they've got those huge airplanes that are darting. That's the only thing can slow it, and that only slows it down.
Vision Sue is trying to bring a huge aircraft to drop some retard someplace close to his crew. Shots and cut off. The question is, where's the crew at? The ops people want to drop, but they're saying they don't know where the crew is. You can hear saws in the background, so they're starting to saw out some brush to clear an area to deploy their fire shelters. fire shelters can withstand radiant heat, but if the flame touches the shelters, it'll melt a hole in it and expose the firefighters to intense heat.
If a wildfire fighter has to start to consider deploying a shelter, it's a situation where things have really gotten out of control.
The fact that they had to do that obviously was a serious situation and took my awareness to what was happening to a new level.
One of the operations chiefs told me, "Did you hear what happened?" Grand Mountain deployed. I had pretty much pulled myself out with just listening and praying for their safety at that point in time.
I got a call from a very good friend of mine, and she had kind of told me what was on the news. I was hoping the media just had it wrong. Found out that I was supposed to meet at a designated location. I actually called Desiree, and she said to meet at the school. By the time I got there, I still didn't know what happened exactly, but obviously I knew it was bad. A lot of like my friends, Robert's friends, were like crying their eyes out. I was like, what happened? And nobody knew anything. They were just crying.
Yeah.
To get that kind of a reaction out of that many people, it's bad. I grabbed the Prescott firefighter and I said, is my husband alive? And he just said, what's your name? And I told him my name and he like just shook his head and he said no.
The original report was 18 had perished, and then a few minutes later, they confirmed that there were 19.
Right below is where 19 heroes.
Yeah, fence off the side is where they passed away. Where the white is down there. We've been hiking it because we want to get to the bottom of this thing and the truth of this whole deal. This is a roll of tape that is burned into a wall. It was probably a remnant roll. Kind of sad that they didn't get a hold of this fire early on. That's, my opinion about the thing.
The mystery of what happened hinges on why the crew left the ranch, the burned area, and went down into a box canyon filled with boulders and brush. What they hoped to achieve, why they abandoned many of the sort of fundamental tactics that are taught, I don't know why. And none of the investigative reports have come up with an explanation yet. Nature doesn't care about this. Fire is just going to do whatever its circumstances allow. The way you control fire is by controlling what is out there. So we're going to have a lot more fire in the landscape unless you take control of the landscape itself.
My kids are 3 and 4, so I didn't want to give a lot of detail. They don't need it. I told them that Daddy had an accident at work and that he was in heaven and was not able to come home. It wasn't somebody's home, it was somebody's well-being. And that he would have been willing to die for. He would have done anything so that somebody wouldn't have to go through pain like that, He was a very remarkable human being. The most I've ever met in my life. I knew you would have probably thought so too.
These men changed my life better, the best. Their goal was to make me and everyone on that crew, and everyone they surrounded themselves with, the best person they can be, inside and outside of work.
You know that saying, time flies when you're having fun? Well, I really look forward to the day that I get to be in heaven with my husband. But if I don't have fun, it's going to be a long time. So if we all have as much fun as we can and try to live good lives, then I'll get to heaven and I'll get to be with my husband again.
We can't rest on our laurels anymore. I mean, we've gotten to a point where these events are becoming so extreme. It's a call to action.
This is a unprecedented loss in wildfire fighting, 19 people. Unless we get a better handle on how fire crews are going to operate in these very, very dangerous situations, this scenario could happen again.
Do you see this getting worse?
Can only hope and pray it doesn't.
So in any case, just understand that's why now we have these programs like Fire Foundry, and we're going around and doing something about it, at least in the state of California, clearing out fire brush, educating the new recruits so that you understand the risk involved here and you don't take any safe location as entirely safe, and you understand the risk of what you're about to embark upon. When I said in the beginning of the semester, you need to seriously consider what you want to do with your life. If it's not this, then don't give your life to it. In some cases, you actually do. All right. Well, I will see you, and happy Thanksgiving, and I'll see you next week.